Hello.
Recording. All right. Okay. Go away. Right. Very good. Yours. There we go. All right. I'll get this thing yet. Okay. All right. So we are continuing with this discussion of this 70-year period of that we find in the book of Jeremiah. He prophesies that the exile, the Babylonian exile, is only going to last 70 years. And the miscalculation, but all the kings are all miscalculating the. Oh gosh, I'm looking at my notes here. Boy, I really spelled a lot of things wrong. Oh well, I hope you guys can figure it out. The miscalculations caused by these foreign kings, including Achashverosh, and therefore they all thought, oh, 70 years is by, nothing happened, Jews didn't go back, so therefore we're free to use their stuff. But of course, they had miscalculated, and that's why they all got into trouble. Belshazzar dies and loses his kingdom. And Achashverosh. Now, why Achashverosh's punishment is that Vashti dies? That seems to be, from his point of view, a positive. But anyway, that's the result. That's the consequence of his miscalculation. And then it goes on to say that even Daniel made it's obviously a very complicated thing to do, because even Daniel erred. And that's where we have right here, Amar Rava af Daniel ta'a behai hush bena. Even he made a mistake in his calculation, because it was written in the book of Daniel, Bishnat echad lemacho ani Daniel binoti basfarim. Now they translated here as I meditated in the books. It's from the root bina, which is to consider, discern. But it could be also, probably here it's best translated as I calculated, or I contemplated the books. And the responsible, what does it mean? He contemplated it. I mean, the calculations. Over the number of years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, the prophet, that God would accomplish for the desolations of Jerusalem 70 years. So already Daniel was trying to figure it out himself. And since the term here is he contemplated, it means he probably inferred that he had previously erred. He had made a mistake earlier, and now he was trying to figure it out. So even Daniel had difficulty figuring out when that period, what that exact period of 70 years was. Mikol makom kashu karei hadade. Though in any case, we've got a contradiction, because in one place in Jeremiah, Jeremiah's prophecy was after 70 years are accomplished, milot levavel, after they were fulfilled, after 70 years were fulfilled, I will remember you and perform my good word toward you in causing you to return to this place. And the term in that verse is efkod, which can mean remember or I'll visit. But in another verse, in Daniel, it says that he would accomplish for the desolations of Jerusalem 70 years. That was right up here in that previous verse. And so what's the difference between fulfillment of Bavel, of whatever was going on with Bavel, and the destruction, the desolation of Jerusalem after 70 years? So there's possibly two different, calculations going on here. Amar Rava lifkida be'alma. The 70 years that are accomplished for Babylonia were only for being remembered. And here that term pakad, efkod, can, as we saw up here, it could be remember, it can be visit, sometimes it can be something bad happening. But here, according to Rava, and the way that Steindl is translating it, is it was 70 years of being remembered, meaning that it was mentioned. that the 70 years mentioned there are only for thinking about the return. But and this is as it is written with regard to Cyrus's proclamation permitting the Jewish people's return to Eretz Israel in the 70th year of the Babylonian exile. Cyrus said, "Thus the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged," here's that word pakad again, "has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem." The verse makes use of the same root, heralding the return to Jerusalem to build the temple, but not its actual completion. And this was the confusion. Yeah, the Jews returned after 70 years, but they didn't rebuild the temple right away. It took a while. There were issues. And I think the notes here, let's see what he's got in his notes. I thought the notes made that. No, okay. Maybe it was in the other text. Okay. So then, okay, now we've mentioned Cyrus, and now we've got another statement about Cyrus, because Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda interpreted this verse about Cyrus. So it says in Isaiah 45, verse 1, Ko amar Adonai limshicho lechoresh asher hechazakti v'mino. This is Isaiah number 2. Isaiah 2 lived in Babylonia, and during the time, or I think it was right before the time of the return. And he was giving constantly. So Isaiah 2 is a lot of very uplifting messages. We read them for the Haftarot between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, because they're all about, don't give up. God still loves you, even though we've been exiled. God loves us. God will return us to the land. God hasn't forgotten about us. So this is from that Isaiah, because clearly there are at least 2 Isaiahs, because they live at very different times, or refer to different periods of time. So anyway, in this case, it's thus as the Lord said to his anointed, his Mashiach, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held. And that's amazing that Cyrus is being called the Messiah. Now, was Cyrus God's anointed one? Was he the Messiah? Ella amar le hakadosh baruch hu leMashiach. This is what he said. God was talking to the actual Messiah. And kovel ani lecha al Koresh. I'm really irritated. I criticize Koresh. Ani amarti hu yivne beiti v'kabet gliotai. He shall build my house and gather my exiles. That was in Isaiah. But he didn't do it. Rather, what he did is he said, Mi v'chem mikol amo v'ya'al. And the whole verse here is in his Ezra. So from the book of Ezra, which obviously is the time, this is the period when the people were going back and rebuilding. Whoever is among you of all his people, let him go up to Jerusalem. So basically, Cyrus was, according to God's plan, Cyrus was supposed to rebuild the temple, as the Jews went back, but he didn't. He didn't build it. He basically said, you guys, you go back and you rebuild it. So here, the comment here was, I am complaining with regard to Cyrus, for if he acted accordingly, the second temple would have been built differently, and it would not have been destroyed. There wouldn't have been a last exile, and the coming of the Messiah would have been sooner. So according to this Chilushe Agadot LeRashba, who's Rashba Shimon Bar Asvili, that it wasn't just that Cyrus wasn't doing his job. It was that he was, putting the burden on the Jews. You guys go build it. It's that he didn't fulfill his duty. If he had fulfilled his duty, the temple would have built, I don't know, maybe it would have been more securely. Not sure what that meant. But according to the Rashba, it wouldn't have been destroyed. And then the Messiah would have come. So Cyrus really screwed up.
It's sort of interesting here that this discussion mentions the Messiah to whom God is complaining.
Right.
But it doesn't otherwise identify the Messiah.
Right. So there's this idea, right, that the Messiah is this character who again, it's a supernatural character. Not all the ideas about the Messiah that they're supernatural. All right. I mean,
Right.
Isaiah refers to Cyrus as the Mashiach, but the idea that the Messiah is a supernatural character who is in the heavenly regions with God, just waiting for the moment to come, but it's got to be the right moment, and Cyrus screwed it up, so the Messiah is still sitting there waiting for the right time. Yeah, it's very interesting. The whole concept of Messiah is very interesting because there's no dogma on the concept of Messiah. It's this image that we're given. There's some hints in the Bible itself. The rabbis develop it in greater detail, of this kind of end period. The medievalists developed the idea. Rambam is the closest to a dogmatic approach, where he says the Messiah shows up at the end of time and enters into a period of 1,000 years. So it's not even really the end of time. It's like the penultimate period, and there's 1,000-year reign of the Messiah, and things are, and the world is a much better place. Everything is according to the way it's supposed to be, fairness and goodness and equality. And then at the end of the 1,000 years comes the day of judgment. So this is how he puts all these different pieces together. And that day of judgment, then everybody gets judged. And of course, there's physical resurrection. People come back. This was very controversial because Maimonides, in other writings, makes it's not so clear that he actually believes in physical resurrection, that the body is eternal. But in this plan, there's physical resurrection, and then you have that final judgment. Those who are worthy, live forever in paradise, and those who aren't are, I think they just are, don't make it. They just go into oblivion. So he had but there isn't really any clear picture of then we've got the image in the Talmud of two messiahs, the Messiah son of Joseph and the Messiah son of David. The Messiah son of Joseph is the warrior king, the warrior Messiah, and he dies in battle, I think, and then that leads the way to the Messiah of David. So we have all these different images of Messiah. So here's another one where he's hanging out with God, and God's talking to him and saying, I'm really irritated that Cyrus blew it. You could have come a lot sooner. All right, so here we have so now we're back to the verses for the Megillah, and then we're still in chapter 1. Here's the verse: the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces. And then it's written near the conclusion of the Megillah in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. So the question is, you have here Paras Umadai, but then at the end of the book it's Umadayu Faras. So what's the why is it why do they switch it around? Why don't you have any consistency here? So the answer is, Rava says, these two peoples, there were the Persians and the Medes, and they had a deal with each other. They stipulated with each other. If the king comes from us, then the noblemen, the ministers, where's the term here? The ministers or the governors will come from you, and if the kings come from you, then the ministers will come from us. Therefore, in reference to kings, it mentions Media is mentioned first, whereas in connection with nobles and princes, Persia is mentioned first. So I don't, Achashverosh, I don't remember if he's a Persian or a Mede, but I guess if well, here, see okay, so here's what they're saying is Chel paras umadai. So the chel, that's why they mentioned paras first. And in the end, the malchei, madai, ufaras. And so the malachi, madai, Medea comes first. So I don't know, I guess maybe Achashverosh was a Median. All right, so the next verse is Beharoto et osher kevod malchuto. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, his kavod, and the honor of his majestic tiferet greatness. I should have these verses up here, but okay. So the term kavod and tiferet are used in this verse to describe the glorious riches of Achashverosh's kingdom. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, noticing these two key words, tiferet and kavod, says it teaches here shelavash bigdei kehuna. Right, he wasn't just using the vessels. We'll get to that in a moment. He wasn't just using the vessels of the temple, but he would also dress himself in the priestly garments. And the reason he suggests that is because when in the book of Exodus, when they describe the creation of those garments, it says lichvod uletifaret. So those terms, it's again, using the same words, you draw this connection between the two passages. So that's their proof that he was also wearing the priestly vestments. So this guy Achashverosh is basically exploiting all of the temple finery. It's interesting because, you know, in the story itself, Achashverosh comes off as I don't know if I would say a buffoon, but certainly somebody who just, you know, anybody can sway him. He's not he doesn't have a idea in his head other than drinking a lot. He's swayed by Haman, and then he's swayed by Esther. But here in the Talmud, they really make him out to be a very bad guy, no different than any other terrible king. Okay, next verse. And when these days were fulfilled, the king made a feast for all the people that were present in Shushan, the capital. Now, based on this verse, Rav and Shmuel disagree whether his policies are wise or foolish. One said, Achashverosh arranged a feast for the residents of Shushan, the capital, after the feast for foreign dignitaries that preceded it. As mentioned in the earlier verses, should have the verses at least in front of me. But okay. Well, anyway, he said that he arranged for the feast for. I see. Here we go. We had that verse. Where was the verse here? When Chel Parasu Madai. Where's the thing about? Here we go. Here's 1:3. The army of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces. That was first. So first he invited those guys, and then 2 verses later, and when these days were fulfilled, he made a feast for all the people that were present in Shushan. So the Shushanites came after the other, the leaders of the provinces, right? Remember, he controlled 127 places, provinces, nations. So the outsiders were feasted first, Okay, so that makes him a clever king. The other one said, no, he was a foolish king because of that. The one who said, and notice whenever they say one and the other, so it's that they don't remember, they know that Rav and Shmuel had this argument, they just can't remember who took which side of the argument. But the one who said he was clever maintains that he acted well when he first brought close those more distant subjects by inviting them to the earlier celebration, because he could appease the residents of his own city whenever he wished, right? It's more important to control the ones who are more distant from you, because they're not around you all the time. But the one who said he was foolish maintains that he should have invited the residents of the city first to, strengthen the connections with those closest to him, because if there was a rebellion in those outer provinces, he needed the ones close to him to support him. And by insulting them, by feasting with them later, he was putting himself in danger. So I just think that that's an interesting argument about politics, about political policy. You know, who do you keep closest? The ones who are farther away, you're a little bit more, you know, you don't have as much control over them, so you want to keep their loyalties, or do you maintain it? Do you maintain the loyalty of those closest to you, because they're the ones who are going to more likely to stand with you if there's problems? You know, you can argue that in modern politics too, right? The Democrats, should they be this? I mean, this is the classic argument every year with the Democrats. Do they focus on the, you know, their natural allies, the people, the communities of color, the young, immigrants, liberals, progressives, you know, make sure you've got those people behind you? Or did they go out and try to get those Reagan Democrats and reach out to them first because they can trust that their allies are going to stick with them, you know? Or will they not turn out to vote for them? So that's kind of it's fun to see these core political arguments in another context, right? I mean, this is the classic political argument for thousands of years. This dispute concerning Achashverosh's reputation still exists among historians today. Now, that already is a questionable statement. I don't know if Achashverosh, I mean, we know it's a made-up king. What we don't know is he based on? Some people say he was actually Artaxerxes, I think is how you pronounce his name, and that he wasn't a historical character. So already when Steinzel is saying that this reputation exists among historians, then you got to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. His character, as it appears from the lines of the Book of Esther, and more so from the Midrash, is that of an unbalanced man who's easily influenced by his advisors and chamberlains. In addition, the Greeks he fought against and to whom he suffered a number of defeats vilified him in several ways. Their description of him is quite negative. However, Ahasuerus succeeded in the early years of his rule, until his mind was put at ease, as mentioned earlier. Okay, this is, so you're using the Talmud as the historical source. He quelled severe rebellions in Egypt and Babylonia and proved his militaristic abilities in these wars. Now, what it is interesting is that there's a theory about the Book of Esther that it was written, I'm trying to remember, Del Berlin is the author of the commentary for JPS. And I think that, if I remember correctly, her argument is that the Book of Esther is actually written from a Greek point of view, because, and they're making fun and all the stuff about I mean, it could be a Greek Jewish point of view, but they're buying into a lot of prejudices that Greeks had towards the Persians. And a lot of the stuff, it was basically the Book of Esther is based on Greek satires of Persia and what goes on in Persia. So it's not surprising. So when he says here the Greeks vilified him in many ways, it may be that the Book of Esther is also vilifying this Persian king, because it's written from a Greek bias. Okay. The students of Rabbi Yochanan of Shimon Bar Yochai asked him, for what reason were the enemies of the Jewish people? Here we have that phrase again. Enemies of is just a euphemism, so you don't have to say something negative about your people, or we saw earlier about God. So instead of saying something that's questionable or negative or doubtful about God, or the Jews, you say the enemies of them. But we all know it's a euphemism. So basically what he's saying is, why was Israel guilty of, or worthy of, deserving of punishment, in that generation, not more than punishment, klaya, of annihilation, destruction. And he said to them, all right, imru atem, you give an answer yourselves. Now Steinsaltz has a big explanation as to say the answer yourselves. Apparently, if the students asked, they did not know the answer. So why did Rabbi Shimon ask them for their answer? So some explain it as the question was, why did the Jewish people deserve to be destroyed? They understood that the people had sinned, yet they couldn't understand why they were being punished so severely. So to this, Rabbi Shimon replied, save yourselves at least what you do, save for yourselves what you do understand. Explain the reason you feel they deserve any punishment. And then, to me, it seems like, this is just a way that this is how teachers teach, why were Jews deserving of annihilation? Okay, you give me the answer. You think about it. Give me what you believe. And so they do. And the answer that they offer is because they went to the feast of Achashverosh. They participated. The assumption is that they participated in that feast that the opening of the book describes. But then Rabbi Shimon says, well, if that was the answer, if it was because they ate the food there, and let's just see the note here, it says, so the possibility is they were eating forbidden foods. Secondly, the Gemara mentions earlier that Achashverosh held the feast as an act of disbelief in Jeremiah's prophecy. Right? He was celebrating the fact that those 70 years never came to fruition. The prophecy of the 70 years never came to fruition. And so by participating, it made it look like he was right. Yep, I guess you were the winner. We'll go to your feast. Okay. So that's their argument. He says, but if that was so, then those in Shushan should have been destroyed, the Jews there. But why would the Jews anywhere else, those in the rest of the world, they shouldn't have been killed. So, okay, so you give us your answer. All right, and he says, Amar lahem mipnei shehishtachavu letzelam. It's because they prostrated before the idol that Nebuchadnezzar had made, as is recorded that the entire world bowed down before it, except for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, I think this is really interesting response. Nebuchadnezzar, first of all, Nebuchadnezzar is a Babylonian. Secondly, he's well before the Persians conquered. I mean, Achashverosh is years after Nebuchadnezzar, at least 70 years later. So why do you think that his answer, or all right, we should say this. The answer is the Tselem, that they bowed down to the Tselem. Steinsaltz in the commentaries suggest it was Nebuchadnezzar's idol. Right? We could have said it could have been Achashverosh's idols that they were bowing to. But the commentaries suggest it was Nebuchadnezzar. But why would they be punished with annihilation for doing something 70 years before? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
But what about Daniel? Daniel bowed.
No, well, that's a good point. Right, they didn't mention here Daniel, but yeah, where was Daniel in that situation? Because the story tells of the three of them, and then they go into the fiery pit, and the angel saves them. So where was Daniel? He obviously didn't bow down. We know that he wouldn't even eat their food. So I'm not sure why Daniel's not mentioned here, unless it was before Daniel shows up. But in any case, I think it's real. To me, it's an interesting response that they would say Nebuchadnezzar. So either, to me, there's two possibilities. One, the reason why the commentary suggests Nebuchadnezzar is because it's too horrible to think that the Jews of Mordechai and Esther's day were bowing down to idols. And then they really wouldn't be deserving of being saved. The other possibility is that they suggest Nebuchadnezzar, and by saying that, it tells us that there is a gap between God's requiting punishment of the people and their deeds. So even though 70 years before or more, the Jewish people bowed down to this idol and were kind of given up, and the Babylonians were the more powerful ones, and they were willing to bow down, except for these three righteous men. That was a long time ago, but you know what? God had not, the punishment hadn't been fulfilled. There was still, God takes God's time when for corporate punishment. And I think that's just an interesting idea, because in some sense it answers the question, you know, when somebody does, or the Jewish people do something wrong, they don't get punished right away. So is there such a thing as reward and punishment? And here the answer is, well, yeah, there is. It's just you don't know when that punishment's coming. So don't stop believing in reward and punishment. Anyway, the discussion goes on. Amrulo v'chima so fanim yesh badavar. Is there, so then the question is, well, if it's true that they should have been destroyed for bowing down to this idol, except for these three guys, then how come they were saved? How come they're saved at the end of the book? Is there, this is an interesting translation, is there favoritism expressed by God here? Is God being, basically, is God being overly compassionate here over, what's the word I'm looking for? For giving beyond what God should do, because they did this terrible thing. And he said to them, well, okay, they weren't really worshiping the idol. They were just pretending to do so for appearance. Let's see what the note here says for appearance. The Maharsha, who does a lot of commentary on these kind of narratives, explains that the Jewish people's prostration before the idols was only out of fear, and thereby it was an act with only the outer appearance of idol worship. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed be He, treated them accordingly and only gave the appearance that God would decimate them. In fact, God's heart was as true to them as theirs was to Him. Now, I don't know what generation the Maharsha is. Must have been in obviously the medieval period. I'm sure he's Ashkenazi, but I'm guessing that he understood this very deeply in his time, when certainly among the Jews in Spain understood this, but Jews in Europe did too. That there were obviously times when they would be forced to, pray to the cross or bow down before something, and you do it to save your skin at that moment, and then. But you know that you're just doing it for appearance. You're not truly believing in this. Anyway, they did not. So therefore,
Maharsha was a bit later. He was born in 1555.
1555. So he
was second half of the 16th century, early.
Right. So
third of the 17th century. So that's quite late.
Yeah. Well, except that it's not late if you're living in Europe, right? I mean, the Jews in Europe are being threatened constantly with Christians being forced to accept their views. 1550, he may have been aware. It's not so clear actually how aware the Jews of the North were what was going on in the South, in Spain.
He was born in Poland and died in Ukraine. So.
Yeah. So this is what's going on for the Jews in those areas. And you say 1550. So
well, that's when he was born. So
so if he lived, he probably dies before the Khmelnytsky massacres in the Ukraine. But I can't believe that he doesn't know. He wasn't aware of the tensions, that caused those destructions. So yeah, so I'm sure that he's quite aware of this reality that Jews had to do. Sometimes you pretend you do whatever you can do to survive. Not every Jew, even in the Crusades,
We still.
committed martyrdom.
Holy Grail.
So
Rabbi,
yeah,
No,
it's not the same thing. Bow down before a king, like as for example Pharaoh, like
right.
an idol, like an idol.
Right. No. In fact, bowing before the king is appropriate. There's even a blessing that one says when you see a king, a foreign king.
But the Egyptians, Pharaoh was like a god, no, or something
was
like that. No?
considered to be a god, right? So I'm trying to. Do we have any? But we don't have an example of Moses and Aaron where there's nowhere that says that they bowed down to the Pharaoh, right?
Like
What about Joseph?
like Joseph, yeah, because they didn't know that Joseph was Joseph.
Right. So they bowed, right, but Joseph wasn't the Pharaoh. That's a really good question, which is, do we have to go back and look at the text really carefully? I'm trying to remember now. What about Joseph? Does he ever bow down to the Pharaoh?
I don't think so.
I have to go and look to see when he meets the Pharaoh if there's ever a text. Now, of course, he could have, but I don't know if the text ever uses that terminology. That would definitely be a question. So that's a really good question. Look, it's very curious as to, and in fact, we even saw this as an earlier. I think we saw it. Maybe it's coming up. I get confused on what pages we're about to do and what we've already done. But there's a passage where the people, right, when we were discussing whether Mordechai was a Benjaminite or a Judean.
That's coming up at the end of
It's
this
coming out,
stuff.
yeah.
Oh, okay, very good. All right, so we'll see that in a moment. That not everybody was so crazy about Mordechai, right? Because Mordechai and Gerson Cohen famously writes about how the whole book of Esther didn't have to take place because there was no problem with Mordechai bowing down before Haman. What was his big deal? What was the big deal? Why do you have to be so arrogant that he couldn't bow down to Haman? And
Before we go on to that, back
Yeah.
to the earlier discussion about people being forced to do things. I mean, we still acknowledge that, right, in the Kol Nidre.
right. Oh, yes. Right. Well, that's where it comes from. That we've made.
That's where the Kol Nidre comes from, yeah.
Yeah. So, exactly. That's one theory, that it comes from the fact that people felt really guilty about pretending that they were accepting Christianity. But the idea of bowing down before a person is a little more complicated because that's why we have this, this midrash that, Mordechai refused to bow down to Haman because Haman always wore an idol around his neck. Okay, but it's not in the text, right? And they have to make that up because they can't understand what's the problem with bowing down before Haman. Gerson Cohen's suggestion is that he was very arrogant and he didn't want to bow down to an equal counselor to the king, an advisor to the king was equal to him. He wanted to be the top advisor, and so that caused all the problems. And then we'll see as we get to the end here that not everybody was so crazy about. Not all the opinions that Mordechai was so wonderful. Anyway, we'll keep going here. Here's a comment where again they're trying to make sense of the text. Bechatzar ginat bitan hamelech. Okay, so these are three places. Chatzar is a courtyard. Gina is like the palace gardens, and bitan would be possibly the palace, or certainly like bayit. So they're just trying to figure out, how did this happen? Like, were the people in three different places? Were some people in the courtyard, some in the garden, some in the palace? Was it that some people got more people were able to be in the courtyard, but a more exclusive group in the garden, and the most intimates were in the palace itself. So this is what they're arguing. That's where the comments come from as to how they did it. But then there's the final understanding is that he put the people who were coming to this feast in the courtyard, and there were two entryways for them, the garden and one in the palace. So, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to figure that out. Now, the next, again, here we're more language. And I looked this up in Adele Berlin's commentary. I don't know where these words come from. I was surprised that he didn't have anything on language here. But it's got Hur Karpas and Techelet. What are these terms? The hangings, the beautiful mosaics or hangings in the palace, Hur Karpas and Techelet. Well, Techelet we know is blue, is that special blue color, very valuable blue dye. What's Hur? So Rav Amar Chorei, which is, there were holes, lots of holes in the fabric. So it was like a lacy kind of material. So the Hur is describing the type of material. And Shmuel Amar Melat Livana, Itzialahem, that it was, he spread out for them this white a carpet or white wool. And it's interesting, well, and then Karpas, which of course we know from is the term we use on Pesach, it's a green vegetable. So Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, but he takes the word apart. Karim shel pasim. Karim are pillows, cushions of, now he translates here as velvet, but pasim is also stripes. That's like Joseph's coat of many colors was kutonet pasim. So it was a coat. So pasim seems to be like many colored garment, but he translated it as velvet. And then we've got over here more words of curious meaning. Al glile kesef ve'amudei sheish mitot zahav v'chesef. Well, that's the oh wait, this isn't the one that it's Bahat V'Sheish, which is curious. But okay, well anyway, on silver, so they were hanging on silver rods, glilei chesef, amudei sheish, pillars of marble, mitot zahav v'chesef, couches of gold and silver. So Rabbi Yehuda says, what does that mean, couches of gold and silver? So he says it was about dividing up the people. If you were, real, if you were just an everyday noble, you got to sit on the silver couches. If you were the special ones, you got the gold. So Amarlo Rabbi Nechemia, he goes, that makes no sense. Again, this is, politics. You did that, you create this sense of animosity because people would be jealous of one another. They would feel about their status. They would feel, those on silver would feel very hurt about the way they were being treated, and that's not good. So Ella, Haim shel chesef viraglaim shel zahav. So the mitot zahav chesef is simply that the couches were made of silver and gold, that they're gold legs, but the couch itself was made of silver. Bahat v'sheish. So this is a tough one because the sheish is usually marble, but what's bahat? Amar Rav Asi avanim shemit chotetim al ba'alehen. So here's the note on the term shemit chotetot. This expression is explained in various ways. Some maintain that the Hebrew phrase shemit chotetot connotes pleasure. Others explain that it means that a man lowers himself before the stones and that he will do anything to procure them. Perhaps this phrase indicates sin in the sense that it is prohibited for a private individual to have such precious stones in his possession. He must relinquish them to the monarchy, and if he doesn't, he will be executed. So in anything, it's some kind of a pavement of valuable stones. Ravasi says these are stones that ingratiate themselves among with their owners. Similarly, it states elsewhere that the Jewish people will be likened to precious stones, and the Lord their God will save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they shall be as the Avnei Nezer Mitnosisot. So again, Mitnosisot, Mitchotatot. Those words, they're not really similar, but I guess that's the connection. And let me just see here. I thought that I had. Let's see. Oh, I put in my notes that I sent out that the BDB, which is the Biblical Lexicon, suggests that these words come from Arabic, Assyrian, and Egyptian languages. Assyrian was the language of the Eastern Jewish communities, but I just wondered if some of them came from, like, if any of them were Persian. But okay, in any case, that's the term bachat. Then we get vidar v'socharet, another unusual term. Rav said dar comes from dare, that they were lots of rows, and socharet is from sechor. So you had basically like a mosaic, is the way that Rav understands it. Shmuel says it's an Evan Tova yesh bichrachkei hayam vidara shma, that it is a precious stone in the seaports and its name is Dara. Now, the JPS translates it as mother of pearl. So it's kind of interesting that in all the descriptions of these words between Rav and Shmuel in their argument, the modern translators almost always followed Shmuel. I don't know if he was just better at knowing a better philologist, but
My impression is we don't have a very good idea what a lot of these words.
right,
words mean.
exactly. And so we're guessing, because a lot of these are what are hapax legomenas. They're one-time words. You have no idea, so you have to go look in the other languages of the time.
Yeah, even that. I mean,
Exactly.
make some guesses, but sometimes,
Yeah.
but they're not guaranteed, or they don't always fit the context.
Right. So they're so that's exactly what they're trying to do, is trying to fit the context here.
Right.
And they're, and so that's what they're doing here, is these were precious stones. They're all objects of value that were Achashverosh was impressing people with. So he says that he placed it Poshiva be'emtza seuda u'me'ira lahem kitzohorayim. So it was something that glowed or brought out light, because it created light like the sun illumines at midday in the afternoon. Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana shekara dror lechol ba'alei schora. This means that he proclaimed a remission for all merchants, absolving them from paying their taxes. Understand that the word daror is freedom, and socher is a merchant. So at these parties, I guess according to Rabbi Yishmael, at these parties there was a great deal, because they would the merchants would be remitted from paying taxes. And we know that taxes are a big deal in the book, because that's what Achashverosh does at the end of the story. First thing he does once Haman's destroyed is he raises taxes. Okay, v'hashtiya kidat ein ones. The drinking was according to law. No one was compelled. I'm trying to think of. I guess is that the translation? Well, that's his translation. I'm trying to think. Ein ones was like there was no. Yeah, I guess nice is that there was no compulsion if you didn't want to drink. That's what it kind of sounds like. But it also, I'm thinking that there was no end to the drinking. But let's see. So the Gemara says, Mike.
The drinking seemed to go on for rather a long time.
Yes, yes. My chadat. What does it mean, chadat, according to the law? So, Amar Rabbi Chanan Mishum Rabbi Meir chadat shel Torah. So that it was according to the law of Torah, which I'm guessing he doesn't mean here that Achashverosh was following, was calling in Torah scholars to say how much would we drink, but rather just as Madat shel Torah, just as according to the Torah, Achila meruba mishti'ah, when animals were sacrificed, right? When you bring a sacrifice, there was more food offering than there was libation, the portion. It says here the wine libation is quantitatively much smaller than the sacrificial offering that it accompanied. So to here, the food was more than the drink. And maybe that's why they could drink for so long, because they were, eating enough, they weren't getting too drunk.
The JPS translation is, in the rule for drinking was no restrictions.
That's what I thought. Right. Okay, good. Thank you. So, yeah, that's what, no restrictions, no end. You could drink whatever you wanted to drink. So here it says none did compel. Amar Rabbi Elazar, melamed shekol echad ve'echad hishkahu miyayin midinato. Now, he explains it here. This teaches that each and every guest at the feast was poured a drink from the wine of his own country, so that he would feel entirely free as if he were in his home country. So that's what it is. None did compel. You weren't forced, I guess, meaning you weren't forced to drink another wine. You could just limit yourself to your home brew, your home country's brew. And that way also you could control your liquor better. And then the verse continues that they should do la'asot kirtzon ish ve'ish. Rava commented, ish ve'ish, that's the verse here. Well, first of all, la'asot kirtzon ish ve'ish can also be related to enones, that everybody did according to their own will, meaning that you drank wine that you're comfortable, or whatever the liquor that you're comfortable with. But Rava also commenting on this verse, ish ve'ish, Amar Rava la'asot kirtzon Mordechai veHaman. Mordechai dichtiv ish Yehudi, and Haman was called ish tsar ve'oyev. So both of them are referred to in the text as an ish, and so here that they should do according to each man's, to Mordechai and Haman's pleasure. The two of them served, they were like the butlers at the feast, which I assume like the cupbearer in the Pharaoh story of Joseph, it was a pretty big position. And you see they're equals here. Let's see, what was the comment? Even to, they were, the simple meaning is that the feast was according to everyone's wishes, even to enemies. The Maharsha explains that Mordechai intended that all the feasts be in accordance with halakha, and Haman wanted the opposite. There was another comment that Haman, Mordechai made sure that the Jews drank the kosher wine, and Haman served non-kosher wine. But I think, to me, it's interesting that here they're equals. And that lends credence to what we'll get to in a moment, when that negative comment about Mordechai. Gam Vashti Amalka Asta Mishten Nashim Beit HaMalchut. Okay, wait a minute. Beit HaNashim Ibaile. How come it doesn't say she made a Mishten Nashim, a feast for the women in the Beit HaNashim? Why doesn't it say, why is she in the Beit HaMalchut? That's where the guys were. And he Amar Rava, Shnehen L'Davar Avera Nitkavnu. Because both she and her husband were playing around. They were interested in an Avera, in a Davar Avera, in adulterous behavior. And so she was hanging out in front of the guys. trying to woo them. Hainu da amrei anashe, this is like the phrase, ihu bikare ve'itate bebutsine. We don't have to get too graphic here, but with his translation, but the idea comes through. The guy goes out with the pumpkins and his wife goes out with the zucchinis, meaning that they are doing this, they're both looking for out for other partners.
Now,
yeah.
I was surprised to see pumpkins. Sorry.
Yeah, I
Showing up because I didn't think there were winter squash in that part of the world at that time.
Well, I don't. Yeah, so he's translated pumpkin. They're both different types of squash. And again, sometimes it's the same thing as with the other words that we don't know. We don't exactly know what the vegetable that was kare and what was butsine, but there's a sense that they were both squashes, which I believe they did have in that part of the world, but just I'm not sure what kind.
Winter squash is the New World.
What's New World?
Winter squash.
Oh, okay. So I don't know what kind of squash they had, but there must have been some kind of this vegetable, and this is how he's translating it. But the idea is, and I think it's.
Oh, the idea is clear.
Yeah, yeah, right. And that may be why he translated these ways. Pumpkins look a certain way, and zucchinis represent a certain feature of the body. So I think that's why he may have translated it in that way.
So I was really struck, certainly growing up, I had this image of Vashti as not a very nice woman or something. Right. And there's this portrayal here. But when I finally read the book of Esther a few years ago, I mean, there's no way to read it in the 21st century and, take that view of her. She's the one who comes off looking good.
Right. Well, she's right. She's very exploited. But again, this is the rabbis have to make her out to be. They're all bad guys. Right?
I understand that. It's just so striking.
But she's the one who's being exploited and refuses to be exploited further.
Right, exactly. But we'll find out here that why she refused to come. It wasn't because she was being, keep maintaining her integrity. It's that she was trying to cover up something. Anyway, but Yom HaShvi'i Kitov Leva Melech V'Yayin. So on the seventh day, after the drinking, the king was happy, merry with wine. Atu ad hashta lo tav lebayil bechamra. So it took 7 days for him to get merry with wine. So what does it mean that it was 7 days? The seventh day was Shabbat, when the difference between the Jewish people and the Gentiles is most apparent. And that's why the book is pointing out that for the Jews on the seventh day of the week, on Shabbat, we eat and drink and we occupy ourselves with words of Torah and we praise God. Oh, but look at what the Gentiles do. They eat and drink and they only, words of and actions of licentiousness. So look at the difference between the two. Madiot naot v'halal. Oh, so here's the story of that. So the same thing was going on here at this guy's feast, right? Everyone is saying, "Oh, the most beautiful women are the Median women," and these guys are saying, "Oh no, the Persian women are more beautiful." And what does he do? He says, "Klisha animish demeshable, eino lo midai uvelo parsi ele kastii." She's Chaldean, but Babylonian, because supposedly she's the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. And so he says, oh no, my wife who's Babylonian, she's the most beautiful one. And you want to see her? And they said, in uvilvad aruma. These guys they're just gross. And so he demands that she come out naked and dance before everyone. But see, this is the reason why she was punished in this way, because of the famous adage, "Midah she'adam moded ba, modedim lo." The way a person is measured is the way they measure others. The way a person is treated is the way others treat them. A measure for measure. Because this is what Vashti used to do. Vashti Harisha'ah, the evil Vashti, she would make Jewish women take off their clothes and work on Shabbat. Now, why they had to work on Shabbat naked, I don't know, but that was what she would make them do, to humiliate them, I guess. And that's why it says, Achar hadvarim ha'ele kisho chamat hamelech Achashverosh, zachar et Vashti ve'et asher asata ve'et asher nigzar aleha. Keshem she'asta kach nigzar aleha. So, he woke up, and his anger was over, and he was going to get really upset at what happened. Then he remembered that this is what she used to do. So he said, you know what, she had it coming to her. So why did she refuse to come? If she's such a flirtatious one, and she's trying to, hook up with these other guys, Michdi Pritsata Have. She was immodest, as we learned above. So why did she do what she did? Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Milamed Sheparcha Bat Tzaraat. She had tzaraat disease. She had a skin disease. She was really embarrassed to expose herself. And the other possibility is that Ba Gavriel ve'asala zanav. So the angel Gabriel came, and to embarrass her, he fashioned her a tail, which, again, a number of commentaries explain that the term tail doesn't necessarily indicate an actual tail, but some form of abnormal growth. So here again, trying to make sense, make this realistic. But the point is that, hey, don't think that you guys were suggesting that she was a woman of integrity and she wasn't going to be exploited. No. She was just embarrassed. She wouldn't have cared if she had to dance naked in front of other guys. She might have picked up somebody else. But no, it's because she was embarrassed to show her body. And that's why. And sure, she had a tail. And at the day school, when my kids were going to day school, whenever they did, when they were little, and they would do books or stories about the story of Esther, they always drew her with green dots on her face and a tail coming out of her behind. So they were, as if that was what she actually was. Okay, so now we're yeah.
This all seems to be invented in order to justify, first of all, most deeply, I think this reward and punishment theology.
Yeah. Oh,
well, I think,
right. Yeah.
And we don't like Ahasuerus.
Right.
And therefore, all this other stuff follows.
Right. We don't, he's no good, she's no good.
Well, she's no good because he's no good.
Right. Well, but also her lineage, as we get to this next one, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, that doesn't appear in the text anywhere.
No. This is all added midrash to explain this. Vayiksofa melech me'od. What was he so angry about? She refused. So that the assumption is, well, he's angry because she didn't do what he told him to do. But the Rava, it tells us that it was more than she just didn't come. She was clearly not. They didn't have a great relationship. We've already seen that. The relationship. They're always looking for other partners, and now we find out she used to try to humiliate her husband as much as possible. She sent by way of a messenger, you son of my father's stableman, which this is a Persian word, ahu yuriyare. Belshazzar, my father, because she's Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter. Belshazzar, my father, drank wine against 1,000 men and did not become inebriated. And then we have this text from Daniel that shows us he used to drink with thousands of people. And that man, you, Achashverosh, became senseless from wine due to her audacity. Immediately his anger burned him. So she was goading him. Now this is an interesting passage because it actually explains something in this dissertation I was working on, a passage in the book of Sheva Yehuda. So Vayomer HaMelech LaChamim, Man Chachamim, who are these Chachamim? Well, obviously, a Chacham are the sages, right? The Yodea Ha'itim, what does that mean? Sheyodim la'aber shanim v'ligboa chadashim. They knew how to intercalate the calendar. So these are obviously the rabbis they're talking about. And he said to them, Dainuha li, you guys make a judgment. What should I do with her? And they said to each other, Heichi na'aveh, what are we supposed to do? Namely, if we say kill her, then tomorrow when he gets over his drunk, he'll blame it on us that we killed her. We told him to kill her. And if we say shvaka, let her go, then ka mizalzala b'malchuta, then he'll say you've insulted my kingship, my royalty. She scorned the royalty and you've allowed her to do that. So they said to him, miyom shecharav beit hamikdash vegalinu me'artzenu nitla eitza mimenu. The day that the temple was destroyed and we were exiled from our land, we lost the power of prophecy. We don't know how to judge, or in this case, no, eitza nitla eitza mimenu. Ve'ein anu yodim ladun dinei nefashot. We lost the ability to give counsel, to give good advice, and we can't be responsible for judging capital cases. And this is exactly what one of the characters says to the king of Spain when he calls him in and wants to know, I think in that case, it's which religion is better, Christianity or Judaism? And the guy says, no, actually, I think it's a case where he wants to know how to punish somebody who gave false testimony in a libel case. And the Jew is like, hey, man, don't ask me. I don't know what to do. Ever since the temple was destroyed, we don't do capital cases anymore. So it's clearly the author of Shevet Yehuda was lifting this from Megillah. Anyway, so they say, go talk to Ammon and Moab. They were never exiled. So therefore, since they've been settled, their minds are settled. They're able to judge better because they've never had to deal with the upheaval of Exodus. Interesting concept. V'tama amrule, dichtiv sha'anan Moab min ni'urav v'shoket hu el shemorav v'lo hu rak mikli el kli uvegola lo halach al kain amad ta'amo bo v'recho lo namar. Oh, okay, long passage from Jeremiah. Moab has been at ease from his youth, and he has settled on his lees, and he has not been emptied from vessel to vessel. Therefore, his taste has remained in him, and his scent has not changed. So that's why he said, first he went to the Chachamim, and then he went to Hakarov Elav, these guys, Karshana, Sheter, Admatan, Tarshish, Meres, Marsana, Mimuchan, who were not Jewish names. They were Moabites and Ammonites. But that idea that somehow that exile causes this tremendous disruption in culture and in learning is very interesting to me. That that's their excuse, that we can't make these very serious decisions anymore because we've been too unsettled. And that's the power of being in your own homeland. So it's kind of to me, it's a little bit of a Zionist, we wouldn't call, I mean, it's anachronistic use of the term, but a little bit of a Zionistic statement that you need to be in your own place. Anyway, so then they go to Amar Rabbi Levi, Kol Pasuk Zeh Al Shum Korbanot Ne'amar. Oh, so we're running out of time here, so we'll just go quickly here. So each of these, Rabbi Levi is not following this midrash. He's saying that the names of the 7 people are simply references to the offerings. And the idea here is that the ministering angels were trying to boost up Israel. So the terms here indicate that their argument to God. God, this is what your people did. They offered lambs the first year. They offered they made all these offerings, which the Gentiles never did. So be compassionate to them. But now we have clearly another way of reading this. Vayomer Memuchan, going back to the idea that these 7 names refer to 7 Gentile advisors, and Memuchan is Haman. Okay, so how is it Haman? Memuchan is not the same word as Haman. Lamak nikra shemo Memuchan, but he's called Memuchan. Why? Shemuchan lepuranut, that he was preparing. See, now he translates, I would say like he was ready for Puranut. I'm thinking Puranut again. Puranut are calamities. Yeah, here it is. Because he was prepared to bring calamity on the Jewish people. I think okay, so wait, is it, let me see if there's another. Yeah, Rashi though explains that means he was prepared to be hung. That is, so the Maharsha is saying that the calamity is referring to the Jews. Rashi says the calamity is it's a foreshadowing of what happens to Haman. He is going to be hung in the end. So he's preparing all this work is setting the table for him to be hung. Rav Kahana says, why is he Memucham here at the end, right? He's the last of the 7 guys. Karshana, Shatar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, and Marsana, and Memukan. So Memukan is because he's the last one. He's the lowest on the totem pole. But you know what? From here, we see that the common man jumps to the front and speaks first. For the Memukan was mentioned the last of the advisors, but he is the one who shares his opinion, right? He's an opportunistic guy. And then Lehiyot Kol Ish Sorer Ubeveito, that every man shall wield authority in his own house. Rava says the way things played out was very good for the Jews. Because first they sent this letter saying, every man shall wield authority in his own house, which is, of course, so ridiculous because we know that every man is the authority in his house. Nancy, didn't you know that? Every guy is the authority in his house. And so what does it mean? So what are you telling us this news? It doesn't mean anything. So they thought it was dumb and they didn't pay attention. So when he sent the next letters out saying kill the Jews, they were like, they probably didn't even open their mail. It wasn't that they just thought these are silly, and so they didn't take it seriously. Another reason, and here's the explanation of the reason why the letters weren't taken seriously, because even the lowly weaver, the Pardash Shecha, is the commander in his house. He doesn't have to tell men that they're the commanders. But you have Keda Melech Bekidim, Amar Rabbi, Mai Dechtiv Kol Arum Ya'aseh V'da'at Uchasil Yifrosh Ivelet. Why does it say in the book of Proverbs, the prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool unfolds his folly? Because the verse, the difference between 2 different kings in looking for a wife. See, because what did he do? He appoints all these officers to go throughout the kingdom looking for fair young virgins. But that isn't going to encourage people to hand over their daughters. David, when he was elderly, and the idea is that a young virgin would warm his bed and keep him virile, what they did is they said, they sought one young woman. They went for the one who, a particular woman, and asked if she would come. But for Ahasuerus, he had people going out and just picking up women, and then he would choose. And so what did people do? They hid their daughters. They didn't know what was going to happen. As we see later, he seemed to have his way with each of them. Now we get to Mordechai. Mordechai, he was the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. So why did they convey in this verse the names of some of Mordechai's ancestors? It wasn't every one. Rather, they gave some names special mention. And in fact, it was different. It wasn't even that. It's that each of the names that they gave to these ancestors were references to Mordechai. He was a Ben Yair, a person who enlightened the eyes. He was a Ben Shim'i. He was a person who, and translating Ben here as son, Ben can also, like bar mitzvah, doesn't mean the son of commandments. It means a person who is commanded. So here he was a person whom God heard his prayers. Ben Kish, because he knocked on the gates of mercy they were open for him. But he's also referred to as an Ish Yehudi. So is he here? Here we get to the argument whether he's a Judahite or a Benjaminite. So it's a little confusing here. So one answer is he was crowned with honorary names. He was called a Yehudi because of its allusion to the royal tribe of Judah. And he was like the king of the Jews in a sense. He was the leader of the Jewish people in exile. And so therefore they gave him this honorific from the tribe of Judah, the tribe of royalty. Rabbi Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi gave an alternative explanation, makes a little bit more sense. Aviv Binyamin ve'imo miYehuda. He was a mixed product of a mixed marriage. His father was a Benjaminite, and his mom was a Yehudit. Therefore, the families competed with each other over which tribe would take credit. So the family of Judah would say, "Oh, we caused the birth of Mordechai because David did not kill Shimi." Shimi is a character in the story of David who insults David when he's down. And in the Haftarah a couple weeks ago, at the end of the book of Genesis, when we read of David's advice to Solomon before he dies, he reminds him, go make sure that Shimi doesn't die of old age because he insulted me. And at the time I couldn't hurt him, but you take care of him. So David didn't kill Shimi, the son of Gera, when he cursed him, when Shimi cursed David. And therefore, obviously, Shimi had some descendants and allowed Mordechai to be born of those descendants. So thanks to us, Mordechai existed. The family of Benjamin said he came from me because he was a Benjaminite. But then, I don't know, and he didn't explain it here. He doesn't have any explanation here for Knesset Yisrael. And Rashi didn't either. So I don't know what this designation means. But the congregation of Israel at that time said from the opposite perspective. It wasn't boasting, they were complaining. See what this Judean has done to me and how a Benjaminite has repaid me. What a Judean has done to me is referring to the responsibility of Judah. David didn't kill Shimi, although he was liable to the death penalty, and then Mordechai was born from him. Thanks a lot, because of Mordechai's, and we can only suggest that we agree with Gerson Cohen. This is Gerson Cohen's argument. He didn't bow down to Haman for no reason at all, other than probably arrogance and envy. And so that made Haman jealous, and Haman went on to try to kill all the people, all the Jews. And the Benjaminites, thanks Benjaminites, King Saul, who was a Benjaminite, thanks a lot for not killing Agag immediately, because Haman was later born from Agag, and he caused suffering to the Jewish people. So, because Agag was the king of the Amalekites, who Saul did not kill. He allowed him to live, even when he was commanded to kill all the Amalekites. Saul does kill him, so it's a little confusing. Saul seems to kill him pretty soon, so I don't know how how that would have stopped Haman from existing. But in any case, Agag is not killed by Saul. Saul loses the kingdom because of that. And later Haman comes from Agag, and then he causes suffering from the Jewish people. So thanks a lot, Mordechai, and the Benjaminites for putting this guy Haman upon us. So a different perspective there. All right, we'll stop here. I think next week we'll take a week off. It's the first of the year. I'm not sure what my kids are going to be here or what's the story. So maybe we'll take a week off. We'll meet back up the second. Wait, next week, is it it's January 1st, or is it? Yeah, it's January 1st next week, right?
January 2nd.
January 2nd. Okay.
Sunday is.
It's on Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll take next week on. We'll meet the second week of January. Okay. All right. I'll keep sending out the note.
Thank you.
Enjoy a visit.
Thank you.
Kids.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.